She could have been Queen of Castile and Leon twice, but she became Queen of France. You'd say that's a great choice. But it's not that simple. Beautiful Blanca clearly rushed to the altar, which she regretted all her unhappy life. Let's go back to the 14th century. In 1331st year in the family of the kings of Navarre, Philip III and Jean II daughter Blanca was born. This princess was born under heraldic golden lilies. After all, her grandfather was the French sovereign Louis X Soirlevé, and her grandmother was the unfortunate Margaret of Burgundy, who was strangled in the fortress of Château-Gaillard. Since there were considerable doubts about the origin of Jean, simply put, the girl could well be the fruit of an extramarital affair, not the daughter of King Louis. The princess was excluded from the right of succession to the French throne. Consolation prize was Navarre. Therefore, Jean's daughter from birth was called Blanca, Princess of Navarre. The girl grew up an incredible beauty. Historians describe her gorgeous golden hair, her huge blue eyes, and beautiful shoulders. Her beauty plus her noble origins made her a desirable bride for any prince, and the first to marry was a son of the Castilian king named Pedro. Pedro was 3 years younger than the possible bride, which in the 14th century was not considered a great obstacle for noble and wealthy people. But the pretender in the kingdom was in turmoil. The prince had to constantly fight for his right to the throne with his father's bastards, so Blanca's family rejected the marriage project. There was no telling how the confrontation in Castile would end. There was no desire to send a native daughter into such a scorcher. What is curious, the second applicant for the hand of the beauty was the main rival Pedro, named Juan Aragonese. He refused for the same reason. You there to sort it out first, on Spanish shores, who will rule, and we will still think. Besides, Blanca was young and beautiful. There was no hurry. It was the fateful year of 1348. Why fateful? Because the plague had come to France and was ravaging cities all over the kingdom. It was impossible to hide from the disease neither in luxurious palaces nor in monasteries, much less in shacks. In a year and a half, the plague killed up to a third of the population in some provinces. Blanca Navarre's mother, Queen Jean, died of the bubonic plague. In Paris, the wife of the heir to the throne, Princess Bonne of Luxembourg, and the wife of King Philip VI, Queen Jean of Limpidwood, died of the plague. One would think, what marriage plans in such a mournful setting? However, kings have a duty to their subjects. Although the heir to the throne had children with the late Bonne, given the infant mortality rate in those days and the epidemic, Prince John decided to remarry, to consolidate the dynasty's position, and they chose Blanca of Navarre as his bride. The Princess of Navarre arrived in Paris and was greeted with extraordinary warmth. The widower king looked into Blanca's incredible eyes and could not tear his gaze away. She was very good, so much so that Philip VI lost his composure. After a very short time, he called his son for a conversation and reported literally the following: Prince John will marry the Countess of Boulogne, Jean, and the beautiful Blanca the king himself is taking as his wife. They say John was terribly angry. He didn't need a young stepmother, but he could use a beautiful wife. But Philip was almost mad with love. In Brie, Count Robert played a lavish and very hasty wedding. In February 1355th year, in Nanterre married and Prince John. Of course, Jean was very much lost to Blanca. She was older than the new queen, had already been married and had 3 children in her first marriage, but the big plus for Prince John was that Jean had influence on Burgundy. Politics outweighed feelings. As for Blanca, her life flowed in endless pleasures and entertainments. The king enthusiastically demonstrated how much he was in love, showered the newlywed with untold treasures, did not let her go for a minute. Evil tongues claim that the young queen is insatiable in bed, and Philip is clearly inferior to her in temperament and health. But soon everyone began to notice that the king looks tired. He began to fall asleep at council meetings and visibly lost weight. Who was to blame for these changes? Young Blanca, of course. In the summer of 1350 years, the young queen announced her pregnancy. Philip VI, from admiration and gratitude, presented his wife a couple of fortresses. But to see the child he was not destined. In August, the king died. Beautiful Navarre princess reigned only 8 months. Even pregnant, the queen dowager was in the background. The throne was now occupied by Philip's eldest son, Prince John, and next to him on the throne sat the not-so-pretty Jean of Boulogne. Crying Blanca of Navarre moved from the royal palace to a house in the Rue de la Vieille Tixeranderie. Though Blanca was left all her jewelry and gifts from King Philip, it was little consolation, for she could not rule. In May of the year 1351, the Navarrian beauty gave birth to a daughter. This princess could not expect to take the throne. Blanca, on the other hand, could still try. Interestingly, Pedro of Castile was again asked to marry her. By that time, he had already occupied the throne of the kingdom and could offer Blanca a real crown. But here was the trouble. It was well known in Paris that Pedro was in love with his mistress, who had borne him several children. Blanca was not going to confront the favorite, so she refused Pedro. The following years of Blanca's life were not very eventful. She had to intervene when her brother, the King of Navarre, had a serious quarrel with King John II of France. She raised a daughter, but outlived her. The princess died in the year 1371. At the court, the former French queen almost never appeared, and she was not very welcome there. She lived in geysers, in the Norman castle, sometimes in Neaufle-Saint-Martin, and died on October 5, 1398 year. As befits a queen, Blanca was buried in the Basilica of Saint Denis. Blanca of Navarre bequeathed her property to monasteries and to her younger nephew Pierre.